What if the Sumerians' warning predicted the Anunnaki return 5,000 years ago? In the fading light of a Mesopotamian evening, a scribe pressed his reed stylus into wet clay. He was old. His hands trembled slightly. But the message he was recording had been passed down through generations, and he understood that someone, someday, would need to read it. The warning was simple. They came before. They will come again. Watch the sky. The clay dried. The tablet was fired, and then it was buried, deliberately, placed in a foundation deposit beneath a temple floor, where it would wait in darkness for thousands of years until someone found it and wondered what it meant tonight. As your breathing slows and your body settles into rest, we descend into the oldest written records of human civilization, not to excite you, not to frighten you, but to share what the ancient scribes preserved and let you decide for yourself what they were trying to tell us. This is not a story that requires you to stay alert. It is a meditation on time, on cycles, on the strange persistence of certain ideas across millennia. Let it wash over you like water, like the rivers that once flowed through ancient Sumer, carrying secrets to the sea. In 1849, a British archaeologist named Austen Henry Layard stood in the ruins of Nineveh, surrounded by fragments of what would become one of the most significant discoveries in human history. The Royal Library of Ashurbanipal contained over 30,000 clay tablets, 30,000 messages from the ancient world, preserved in baked earth, waiting to be read. As scholars began the painstaking work of translation, they realized these were not ordinary records. Yes, there were administrative documents, tax records, inventories of grain. But woven through the mundane, again and again, were references to beings called the Anunnaki being. Those who from heaven to earth came. The scribes wrote about these beings with a precision that troubled the translators. Not vague spiritual forces, not abstract deities to be worshipped from afar, but specific individuals with names, with genealogies, with designated territories and assigned responsibilities. Enki governed the waters in wisdom. Enlil controlled the air and commanded authority. Ninhursag shaped living things. Inanna ruled love and war. The divisions were precise, almost corporate in their structure, as if someone had organized the administration of an entire world. And the scribes were simply recording the organizational chart. Here is what makes this discovery unsettling. The scribes who created these records were the most educated people in their civilization. They trained for years in the complex art of cuneiform writing.
What did you find?
They were trusted with preserving knowledge that kings and priests considered vital. These were not storytellers embellishing legends around a fire. They were professional record keepers, and they approached the Anunnaki with the same sober attention they gave to grain shipments and building contracts. When they wrote that Anu descended from his celestial dwelling, they recorded it the way a modern clerk might note the arrival of a visiting official. When they described the Council of the Anunnaki making decisions about humanity, they listed who attended, what was debated, what was decided, as if they were taking minutes at a meeting. What would make educated scribes, generation after generation, preserve such records without skepticism? What would make them copy tablets their predecessors had copied, maintaining the same strange details, the same impossible numbers, the same warnings about cycles and returns? Perhaps you have wondered about this yourself. Perhaps you have encountered references to ancient astronauts or alien gods and dismissed them as fantasy. Or perhaps you have wondered whether there might be something worth examining beneath the sensational claims. If so, you are not alone.
The text clearly states
Many people find themselves drawn to these questions, not because they believe every interpretation, but because the original sources themselves are genuinely strange, genuinely precise, genuinely difficult to explain away as mere mythology. Let your body settle deeper now. Let the questions rest lightly in your mind. We have hours ahead of us, and the ancient scribes were patient people. They did not rush their warnings. Neither will we. The word itself carries weight.
It's remarkable how comprehensive
Anunnaki, in the earliest Sumerian texts, dating back to 2600 BCE, the Anunnaki appear not as a vague pantheon, but as a specific group with clear distinctions from other divine beings. There were the EGG, the lesser gods who labored. There were the Anunnaki, the great gods of earth and underworld. And above them all, the supreme deities who rarely descended. The scribes were meticulous about these categories, as if describing an organizational hierarchy rather than abstract spiritual concepts. The name itself breaks down in Sumerian as those who from heaven to earth came, or sometimes translated as princely offspring of Anu. But the context matters more than the translation. In tablet after tablet, cylinder seal after cylinder seal, the Anunnaki are presented not as invisible forces, but as physical beings with specific attributes. They have genealogies tracing back generations. They have children with each other, and occasionally with humans. They eat and drink. Temples maintained regular offerings of food and beer for them, not symbolically, but actually, as if someone might arrive and consume them. They have favorite cities where they dwell. They own specific items and technologies. They age more slowly than humans, but they can be wounded, can feel emotion, can make mistakes. This specificity is what separates Mesopotamian texts from most other ancient mythologies. Greek gods could be vague and allegorical. Egyptian deities merged and shifted in their attributes. But the Anunnaki remained consistent across thousands of years and dozens of cities. Enki in the text from Eridu in 3000 BCE has the same personality, the same responsibilities, the same symbols as Enki in Babylonian texts from 1000 BCE. 2,000 years of consistency, as if the scribes were maintaining historical records of real individuals, updating their activities but keeping their core identities precise and unchanging. Here is something that might stay with you long, after tonight fades into sleep? What would make a civilization maintain such consistency? What would make generation after generation of scribes preserve the same details about beings they claimed had arrived from elsewhere, had established cities, had created humanity, and had promised or threatened to return? The answer the ancient scribes would give is that they were telling the truth, that they were preserving history, not inventing mythology. Black. That the Anunnaki were as real to them as the rivers they drank from, the temples they maintained, the sky they watched each night for signs. Whether that answer satisfies you is something only you can decide. But the warning remained, passed from scribe to scribe, copied onto fresh clay as old tablets crumbled, buried in foundations as temples were rebuilt, preserved through conquest and catastrophe and the slow erosion of empires. They came before, they will come again. Watch the sky, breeze. There exists a document so strange that scholars still struggle to explain it, the Sumerian king list. Inscribed on multiple tablets and prisms, claims to record every ruler of ancient Mesopotamia, going back to the moment kingship descended from heaven. The earliest kings supposedly reigned for tens of thousands of years. King Alulim of Eridu ruled for 28,800 years. King Alalar for 36,000 years. Modern scholars call this mythology poetic exaggeration. But the scribes who copied these numbers century after century never treated them as metaphor. They preserved them with the same careful precision they used for grain inventories and tax records, as if they believed these numbers mattered, as if something about how time was measured had changed. Imagine being a scribe in ancient Babylon tasked with copying this document. You are educated, you understand mathematics. Use numbers every day, calculating grain stores and measuring land. Still, yet here you are, carefully reproducing claims that a king ruled for 36,000 years without questioning it, without adding a note saying this seems metaphorical. You just copy the numbers exactly as they appear in the older tablet, the way you would copy any other historical document. What would make you do that? One possibility scholars rarely discuss openly. What if the numbers are not measuring the same thing we measure? What if the early scribes were trying to translate information from a system that measured time differently, or measured something else entirely that they could only express in years? Or what if, and this is the interpretation that makes scholars most uncomfortable, the numbers are accurate, according to how time was actually experienced by beings the texts connect directly to the Anunnaki bloodline. The king list makes explicit what other texts only hint at. The earliest rulers were not entirely human. They were placed in power by the Anunnaki, chosen from hybrid bloodlines, granted lifespans that matched their divine parentage. The antediluvian kings ruled from cities the texts say were founded by the Anunnaki themselves: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sipar Shurapak. 5 cities before the flood, each one associated with a specific Anunnaki deity who served as its patron and protector. And then came the deluge. The king list describes it simply, without detail. The flood swept over, but everyone reading it would have known the fuller story from other texts. How the Anunnaki Council decided to destroy humanity. How Enki secretly warned a king to build an ark. How the world was reshaped by water. After the flood, the text says kingship was lowered from heaven again, as if the system had to be reinstalled, rebooted. But something had changed. The new kings lived shorter lives. Their connection to the Anunnaki bloodline was diluted, or the conditions that had allowed such longevity no longer existed. Or time itself operated differently in this post-flood world. As the king list moves forward through history, the reigns continue to shorten. By the time we reach the kings of Uruk, the dynasty that included Gilgamesh, we are down to 100 to 300 year reigns, still superhuman, but approaching the upper limits of what longevity myths typically claim. And Gilgamesh himself, described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, spends his entire epic seeking immortality because he knows he is going to die, knows his partial divine heritage is not enough to grant the lifespan of the antediluvian kings or the full Anunnaki themselves. By the time the king list reaches the historical period, around 2500 BCE, the numbers match what archaeology can verify. Kings who ruled for 20, 30, 40 years, normal human lifespans. Bye. The connection to the Anunnaki has become symbolic rather than literal, claimed as divine mandate, but no longer conferring actual extended life. As if whatever genetic or environmental factor that had allowed the early hybrid kings to live centuries had faded, diluted over generations. Until it disappeared entirely. What the king list preserves, then, might be a record of something fading. A chronicle of how connection weakened over time, until nothing remained but humans with myths about their divine ancestors. Or it might record the gradual withdrawal of the Anunnaki themselves, their decreasing presence and intervention in human affairs,
absolutely incredible,
until they existed only in memory and ritual, no longer walking among humans, no longer interbreeding, no longer conferring their attributes on human bloodlines. But the scribes believed they would return, the cycles would complete, the celestial alignments would recur, and whatever had been present at the beginning would be present again. This was the warning they preserved, not if, but when. Let that thought settle gently, like sediment drifting to the bottom of a still pool. You do not need to decide tonight what the king list means. You do not need to resolve the mystery, only to know that it exists, that educated people preserved it for millennia, and that no one has fully explained why. The cycles, the returns, the watching of the sky, these themes appear again and again in the ancient texts, woven through stories of creation and destruction, embedded in astronomical calculations, encoded in the very structure of temples built to face specific stars. The Sumerians were not casual about astronomy.
They tracked celestial movements with precision that seems impossible for their technology.
They divided the sky into 12 sections that became the zodiac. They calculated the slow wobble of Earth's axis, a cycle of 25,800 years, called precession, that modern astronomers did not rediscover until the Greeks. Why would a civilization invest such effort in tracking cycles so long that no individual could witness their completion? Unless they believed something depended on that tracking. But unless they were watching for signs, waiting for alignments, preparing for events their predecessors had warned them about. The warning was always the same, passed down through generations, copied onto fresh clay, buried where it would survive. They came before, they will come again. Watch the sky. Beneath the desert of southern Iraq lies Eridu, the oldest city anyone has ever found. When archaeologists excavated the site in the 1940s and 1950s, they discovered something remarkable. Buried in the deepest layers, 17 successive temples, built one on top of another, stretching back to 5,400 BCE, 7,000 years of continuous worship at the same sacred spot. But it was the Sumerian texts about Eridu that created the mystery. They claimed it was the first city built before the flood, where the Anunnaki first established contact with humanity, where a being named Enki came to dwell among humans and teach them the arts of civilization. The location itself tells a story. In ancient times, Eridu sat at the edge of the Persian Gulf, where fresh water from the Euphrates met salt water from the sea. The texts describe this mixing of waters as Enki's domain, the Abzu, the freshwater abyss beneath the earth, blowing up through Eridu to bring life to the surrounding lands. Today, the site is miles from any water, surrounded by desert, silent except for wind. But when you read the ancient descriptions, you can almost see what it once was. A green place in a golden land, where sweet water rose from the depths, where the first temple stood, where something began.
That first temple was not grand, just a small shrine, barely more than a hut.
And the double layer of bitumen handles the water.
Circa 5,400 BCE, but the people kept rebuilding it in exactly the same spot. As centuries passed and the settlement grew, each new generation demolished the old temple and built a larger one directly on top. Until by 3000 BCE, there stood a proper temple complex with multiple chambers, courtyards, and offerings. Why that spot? Why such devotion to rebuilding in exactly that location across 2,000 years? The archaeological team could not find anything geologically special about the location. No natural spring, no unusual formations, just determination. Generation after generation to maintain a sacred space. A space the texts say marked where Enki first made contact with humanity. Perhaps you have a place like that in your life. A spot that feels significant for reasons you cannot fully explain. A location where something important happened, or where you feel connected to something larger than yourself. If so, you understand something about Eridu, about why people would rebuild the same temple 17 times over 2 millennia, about why place can matter beyond practical considerations. The tablets describing Eridu use language that scholars struggle to interpret. They call it the oldest city built before the flood, the place where civilization began. Not just Sumerian civilization, all civilization. Before Eridu, the texts suggest humans lived as scattered hunter-gatherers with no agriculture, no writing, no cities. Then came Eridu, and suddenly there were all these things taught by Enki. The jump is too fast, too complete. It is the same problem archaeologists face at other ancient sites, complex achievements appearing seemingly without precursor. But at Eridu, the Sumerians left an explanation. The Anunnaki brought these skills, demonstrated them, insisted on their adoption, as if civilization was not invented but installed, implemented according to a plan by beings with prior knowledge of how cities should function.
In the deeper excavation levels, the archaeologists found something else. Buried beneath the temple foundations were foundation deposits.
Small caches containing valuable objects, inscriptions, and food offerings. But unlike typical foundation deposits that ask gods to bless a building, these read more like communications, messages for Enki himself, as if the builders expected him to actually receive them, to read them, to respond. Bold. The inscriptions speak to Enki in second person. They tell him what has been built and why. They ask for his guidance and protection, not prayers exactly, but reports, updates on the status of the city, as if maintaining Eridu was fulfilling a commission, keeping up a facility that Enki would someday return to inspect. Bah! The text described Enki's dwelling in Eridu as the Engira, house of the subterranean waters. They say it reached deep into the earth, connecting to the Absu below. This was not metaphor in their understanding. They meant Enki had a physical residence that extended downward into chambers beneath the city, into the source of the fresh water that made Eridu possible. Archaeologists never found these underground chambers. The water table is too high for extensive excavation in the lower levels, but the texts are specific. Enki kept his knowledge there, his tools, the ME that governed civilization. In the lower depths of his house in Eridu, he planned and created, separated from human eyes, emerging only when needed to advise or correct or teach. Let your breathing deepen now. Let the image of ancient Eridu form in your mind and then dissolve. Do not need to hold on to the details. They will be there if you need them. Like water rising from underground springs, available when you reach for them. The me. This is a concept that resists easy translation. In the myth called Inanna and Enki possesses things called the me, divine powers or technologies that govern all aspects of civilization.
Over 100 specific ME are listed. Kingship,
Priesthood, truth, descent to the underworld and ascent from the underworld, the art of metalwork,
The hierarchy is clear.
the kindling of strife,
Serving the Anunnaki.
the making of judgments,
Colonial
decision
administration
making,
report for cycle 24
the art of
transmitted.
love making,
Resource quotas achieved. Awaiting
the
confirmation
destruction
from
of
the
cities, lamentation, rejoicing. They are listed methodically, without hierarchy, mixing practical skills, abstract concepts, emotions, and abilities that sound
Subordinates must ensure
impossible,
compliance across all 92
like
levels of
traveling
hierarchy.
between worlds. What were the Emmy? The texts treat them as discrete items. Enki keeps them in his shrine at Eridu in the story. Inanna gets him drunk during a feast and persuades him to give them to her, one by one. Once he agrees, she loads them onto her boat and flees to her city, Uruk, before he sobbers up and realizes what he has done. Enki sends his assistant to retrieve them, but Inanna has already crossed into Uruk's territory, and the Emmy cannot be taken back by force.
Labor, or
D.
dulla. It describes
The story is told with humor. Enki is embarrassed. Inanna is triumphant. But the implications are unsettling. These MA are portable. They can be transferred. Cities can gain or lose them. Civilization's capabilities are not inherent, but conferred, dependent on possessing these mysterious objects or technologies that Enki brought and the Anunnaki controlled. Modern scholars call them divine decrees or attributes of civilization, treating them as abstract concepts given physical form and mythology. But that interpretation struggles with how specifically the texts handle them. When Inanna arrives in Uruk with the ME, the text describes the city gaining actual new capabilities, not symbolic spiritual authority, but practical skills and social structures.
What do we do?
Uruk becomes a great city specifically because Inanna brought the ME there.
Accelerate the genesis sequence and create the new species now.
Other cities sought them. Wars were fought over them. They were treated as strategic resources, as sources of real power. Could the ME have been actual technologies? Information storage devices? Genetic templates? Teaching systems? The Sumerian word itself is ambiguous, sometimes translated as powers, sometimes attributes, sometimes norms. But in every story, they are treated as things that can be possessed or lost, that enable capabilities their possessor would not have otherwise. The text suggests civilization was not humanity's invention, but Enki's gift, knowledge transferred rather than discovered, maintained through objects or technologies that could theoretically be lost if the Anunnaki departed and took them back, which, according to the pattern of texts, is exactly what eventually happened. The Anunnaki withdrew, the ME were no longer maintained, the direct connection faded, but the knowledge remained, partially degraded, perhaps, but present, passed down through human institutions that remembered the original teachings even when the teachers were gone. And the warning remained too. They came before. They will come again. When they return, the text suggests the ME will be restored. The capabilities that have been lost will be recovered. The full knowledge that Enki brought will be available once more. If that idea resonates with you, if you have ever felt that humanity has lost something, that we once knew things we have forgotten, that our current knowledge is incomplete, you are not alone. Many people carry this sense. Perhaps it is just nostalgia, romanticizing the past, or perhaps it is something older, a memory encoded in culture, passed down from those who believed they had witnessed greater things. Every ancient culture has a flood story, but the Mesopotamian version is the oldest and in some ways the most disturbing. In the Epic of Gilgamesh and the earlier Atrahasis epic, the flood is not a punishment from a single angry god. It is a decision made by a council. The Anunnaki met and voted. The texts describe a meeting where the gods debate the problem of humanity, too numerous, too noisy, too troublesome. Most of the Anunnaki vote to destroy humanity through flood, but Enki, in secret, warns a human named Utnapishtim, giving him precise instructions to build a boat with specific dimensions, waterproofing techniques, exactly what species of animals to bring. The specifications are remarkably precise. The boat should be a cube, 120 cubits on each side. It should have 7 decks. The door should be sealed with bitumen inside and outside. Breathe. Specific types of timber should be used. The roof should be reinforced. It reads less like a myth and more like an emergency engineering manual delivered under time pressure by someone who understood exactly what was coming. Here is what troubles careful readers. Enki had sworn an oath with the other Anunnaki. He could not warn humanity directly. So instead, the text says, he spoke to the reed wall of a house where Utnapishtim was sleeping. Reed wall, pay attention to my words. He gave the instructions as if speaking to the wall, knowing the human could hear. A loophole, a technicality. The God of wisdom finding a way around the rules to preserve what he believed was worth saving. The flood itself is described with terrifying clarity. For 7 days and 7 nights, water fell from above and rose from below. The texts say even the Anunnaki were frightened by what they had unleashed, that they cowered like dogs and crouched against the outer wall of heaven. Inanna wept, saying, "How could I speak evil in the assembly of the gods, ordering destruction of my people?" As if the reality of genocide they had voted for became horrific once implemented, as if they regretted what they had done even as it was happening. When the waters finally receded and the boat came to rest on a mountain, Utnapishtim emerged and offered sacrifices. The texts say the gods smelled the sweet savor and gathered like flies over the offering. They had been without humans to maintain their temples, to provide food offerings, to do the work of civilization, and they realized they needed humanity. The decision was made then to allow humans to survive, but with modifications, shorter lifespans, increased infant mortality, limits on fertility, a managed population rather than extinction. Humanity would be allowed to rebuild, to repopulate, but always remembering that they existed at the sufferance of the Anunnaki, that catastrophic destruction remained possible if they became too numerous or troublesome again. Biblical flood story in Genesis is clearly derived from these earlier Mesopotamian accounts. But something was lost in translation. Noah's flood is divine judgment on wickedness. Utnapishtim's flood is population control. That got out of hand. One is moral parable, the other is something darker. Documentation of a near-extinction event decided by vote, survived through knowledge secretly transmitted by a sympathetic authority who believed humanity deserved to continue. Let that distinction settle in your mind. The older story suggests that the flood was not punishment but maintenance, pest control that one administrator sabotaged because he thought the pests were worth saving. It is not a comforting interpretation, but it is what the texts actually say, before later traditions softened the story into something more morally comprehensible. And embedded in the flood narrative, the same warning, it happened before, when the Anunnaki were present, when they had the power to reshape the world, when they made decisions about humanity's fate in council meetings. If they return, will they find humanity satisfactory? Will they approve of what we have become in their absence? Or will the council convene again and the debate resume about what to do with a species that has grown troublesome? The scribes preserved this warning, generation after generation, as if it mattered. As if someone in the future would need to know how close humanity came to extinction and how easily it could happen again. Let your eyes grow heavy now, if they have not already. The flood waters receded long ago. The survivors rebuilt, the warning was preserved. And now you know it too. One more link in the chain of those who have heard what the ancient scribes tried to tell us. The discovery of these tablets changed our understanding of human history. Before Layard and his successors, before the clay fragments emerged from the ruins of Nineveh, we knew almost nothing about Sumer. The entire civilization had been forgotten, buried not just under sand and time, but under silence. The Bible mentioned Babylon, mentioned Assyria, but the civilization that preceded them, that invented the writing they used, that created the myths they inherited, that built the first cities humanity has ever found, that civilization had vanished from memory. Imagine being one of the first scholars to translate these tablets. You expect to find administrative records, perhaps some religious poetry, perhaps historical chronicles of kings and battles. Instead, you find detailed accounts of beings who descended from heaven, who established cities, who created humanity, who nearly destroyed humanity, and who departed with warnings about their return. You find numbers that cannot be right, kings reigning for tens of thousands of years. You find descriptions of technology that should not exist, devices that control destiny, craft that travel between heaven and earth. You find a complete alternative history of the world, told with the same sober precision as the grain inventories and tax records. What do you do with that? The early translators did what scholars usually do. They called it mythology. They filed it under religious literature. They assumed the Sumerians were poetic, imaginative, prone to exaggeration, but the assumption never quite fit. The same scribes who wrote about the Anunnaki also wrote mathematical tables of remarkable precision. They calculated the movements of planets with accuracy we did not match until the modern era. They developed a legal code that influenced law for thousands of years. These were not dreamy poets. They were engineers, administrators, scientists by the standards of their time. They applied rigorous methodology to everything. Why would they suddenly become imaginative storytellers when discussing their gods? Why would they abandon precision for fantasy only in this one area? Perhaps they did not. Perhaps they applied the same precision to the Anunnaki that they applied to everything else, because they believed the Anunnaki were just as real as grain shipments and planetary movements, just as deserving of accurate documentation. Let that possibility settle in your mind, not as certainty, but as question. What if the strangest parts of the tablets are the most accurately recorded? What if the scribes were most careful precisely when writing about things we find hardest to believe? The scribal tradition itself deserves attention. Becoming a scribe in ancient Mesopotamia required years of training. Children who showed aptitude were sent to schools called eduba, houses of tablets, where they spent a decade or more learning the complex art of cuneiform writing. They learned to read thousands of signs. Some signs represented sounds, others represented whole words, others represented concepts that modified nearby words. The system was enormously complex. They memorized long compositions, standard texts that every scribe was expected to know. They copied tablets again and again, until the movements became automatic, until they could reproduce text without conscious thought, and throughout their training, they copied the same stories, the same accounts of the Anunnaki, the same warnings about cycles and returns. By the time a scribe was fully trained, these texts were embedded in their mind, part of who they were, part of how they understood the world. They did not question the Anunnaki stories any more than they questioned mathematics. Both were part of the knowledge they had absorbed. Both seemed equally true, equally fundamental. This is how the warning was preserved, not through deliberate conspiracy, not through conscious choice to maintain a fiction, but through the natural processes of education, of copying, of embedding knowledge so deeply that questioning it became impossible. Generation after generation of scribes absorbed the same information, wrote the same texts, believed the same truths, until 5,000 years of consistency accumulated. We do something similar today. The things we learn in childhood become foundations of thought. We do not question them because we cannot imagine questioning them. They are simply how the world is. The Sumerians learned that the Anunnaki were real, that they had come from heaven, that they would return. They learned this the way we learn that the earth orbits the sun, as fact, not as belief. If you have ever wondered why ancient people believed things we find strange, this is part of the answer. They did not believe in the way we mean when we say belief. They knew the way you know that water is wet The way you know that fire burns. The Anunnaki were not articles of faith. They were facts of existence, as obvious to the Sumerians as gravity is to us. Let that understanding deepen your rest. The ancient scribes were not foolish, not gullible, not primitive in their thinking. They were people like us, doing their best to understand and document a world they had inherited, passing along what they had been taught. We do the same. We pass along what we have learned, trusting that most of it is true, unable to verify everything for ourselves. The chain of knowledge is long, and every link trusts the links that came before. Among all the Anunnaki, none is described with more complexity than Inanna, later called Ishtar, goddess of love and war, yes, but also something more disturbing. The descent of Inanna describes her journey to the underworld with unsettling precision. She passes through 7 gates. At each gate, she must remove one item: crown, necklace, breastplate. The text gives exact descriptions of these items and the order of their removal. In the underworld, she dies and is resurrected 3 days later through the intervention of Enki. Scholars call this a myth about the seasons, or the planet Venus, whose disappearance from the sky and reappearance after a period of invisibility mirrors Inanna's descent and return. But the text reads more like an account of someone undergoing a dangerous procedure, someone passing through checkpoints with specific protocols, someone risking actual death to retrieve something from a place humans could not normally access. The text begins with Inanna's decision to descend. She adorns herself carefully before the journey. The text lists each item: the crown, the measuring rod and line of lapis lazuli, small lapis lazuli beads around her neck, sparkling stones on her breast, gold ring in her hand, breastplate, royal robe, 7 items total. She instructs her assistant Ninshubor on what to do if she does not return. Wait 3 days, then seek help from Enlil, then Nana, then Enki. Specific instructions, as if she knows this journey might be one way at the first gate of the underworld. The gatekeeper demands to know why a living being seeks entry to the land of no return. Inanna claims she has come for funeral rites. The gatekeeper consults Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, who gives permission with one condition: Inanna must follow the ancient laws. The text describes each gate, each removal, systematically in heaven. First gate, crown removed. Second gate, measuring rod and line removed. Third gate, lapis lazuli beads removed. Fourth gate, sparkling stones removed. Fifth gate, gold ring removed. Sixth gate, breastplate removed. Seventh gate, royal robe removed. She arrives before Ereshkigal naked, stripped of all divine attributes and protections, and then Ereshkigal kills her, simply, brutally. Inanna is struck dead, and her corpse is hung on a hook on the wall of the underworld. 3 days pass. Ninshubur follows the instructions, seeking help from the gods. Enlil refuses. Nanna refuses. Only Enki agrees to intervene. He creates 2 beings from the dirt under his fingernails, neither living nor dead, able to enter the underworld without triggering its rules. He gives them the food and water of life and sends them to retrieve Inanna's corpse. They find it, sprinkle it with the food and water, and Inanna revives. But the underworld does not let go easily. The ancient laws require a substitute. Someone must take Inanna's place in death. She returns to the surface world, accompanied by gala demons, tasked with dragging someone back in her stead. She finds her husband Dumuzi sitting on her throne, not mourning her at all, and in fury designates him as her replacement. The demon sees him. His sister Geshtinana volunteers to alternate with him, 6 months each in the underworld. And this pattern, the text says, repeats eternally. Scholars interpret this as the reason for seasonal cycles. But read without that interpretive layer, the text describes something else. A systematic stripping away of protections at multiple checkpoints, death and resurrection after 3 days, return bearing knowledge from beyond death, Enki's intervention with technology that can reverse death if applied soon enough, the requirement of substitution, as if the underworld operates on balance sheets that must add up. What was Inanna retrieving?
The text never explicitly says she claims she came for funeral rites,
but the narrative structure suggests another purpose, descending to gain knowledge that only death could provide. Knowledge that would distinguish her from other Anunnaki who would never cross that boundary. After her return, Inanna is described differently in texts, with new attributes, new powers, new authority, body, as if whatever happened in those 3 days changed her fundamentally, as if she had undergone transformation that left her with capabilities none of the others possessed. The knowledge that death was not final, at least not for those with access to the right intervention at the right time. Let that image rest in your mind. The goddess descending through 7 gates, being stripped of everything that defined her, dying, and returning changed. Perhaps it is about seasons. Perhaps it is about Venus disappearing below the horizon. Or perhaps it preserves memory of something else, something the scribes recorded because they believed it had happened, because they believed it mattered. The underworld in Mesopotamian texts is not quite like other afterlife concepts. It is not a place of punishment or reward. It is simply where the dead go, where they exist in diminished form, drinking dust, eating clay, moving slowly through darkness. But it is also described as a real place, with gates and guards, and a queen who rules, a place that can be visited by the living, though at great risk. The boundary between life and death, like the boundary between heaven and earth, was permeable in Mesopotamian thought, crossable under certain conditions. by those with the right knowledge and the right protection. Perhaps this is connected to the warning. If boundaries can be crossed, if the Anunnaki could descend from heaven, if Inanna could descend to the underworld and return, then what other crossings are possible? What other boundaries might be permeable at certain times, under certain conditions, when certain cycles complete? The warning was not just about physical return, about beings arriving from somewhere else. It was about the structure of reality itself, about boundaries that seem solid but are not, about conditions that can change, allowing passage where passage was impossible before. Watch the sky, because the sky is a boundary, and boundaries can open. In multiple Mesopotamian myths, there exists an object of ultimate power, the Tablet of Destinies. Whoever possesses it controls the fates of gods and humans alike. The myths describe battles over this tablet, thefts of it, desperate struggles to reclaim it. But what makes this artifact so unsettling is how it is described. With physical properties, it is written upon, it must be consulted, it can be worn on the chest. In the Anzu myth, the bird demon Anzu steals the Tablet of Destinies from Enlil while the god is bathing, and the entire cosmic order collapses until it is recovered. The Sumerians were not describing abstract authority. They were describing something physical, something that somehow controlled events, something that would be catastrophic if lost. The Akkadian text is specific. Anzu was a divine being, part bird, part lion, who served in Enlil's temple. He watched Enlil remove the Tablet of Destinies and place it aside before bathing. The tablet was described as resting on Enlil's chest, worn like a breastplate or badge of office. Seeing an opportunity, Anzu snatched the tablet and fled to his mountain stronghold. The immediate effect was catastrophic. The text says divine order was removed, and all decrees became silent. It was not just that Enlil's authority was diminished. The actual functioning of reality stopped working properly, as if the tablet was less a symbol of power and more a control device, and removing it from its proper operator caused system failure. The Anunnaki Council met in emergency session. They needed a champion to recover the tablet. Whoever faced Anzu while he held the Tablet of Destinies would be fighting someone who could alter their fate, decree their death, unmake them with words. Several gods refused the mission. Finally, Ninurta, the warrior god, agreed to attempt recovery, but he could not fight Anzu directly. The battle is described in detail. Arrows that Anzu turns aside with commands. Attacks that fail because Anzu decrees they will fail. Reality itself bending to the tablet holder's will.
It's a place on Earth where nightmares are real with means to run.
Divine authority functioned again. Decrees could be made and enforced. The machinery of governance resumed operation. The myth is celebrated as a victory, but the implications are unsettling. If divine power required a physical object to function, If the Anunnaki themselves could be rendered powerless without this tablet, then what were they really? And what was the tablet? What technology could do what these texts describe? What device could allow its user to decree destinies and have reality comply? Modern readers might think of quantum computers calculating probability, or advanced AI with power to model and manipulate complex systems, or technologies we cannot yet imagine. The Sumerians had no words for such things, so they described what they witnessed using the language they had. A tablet that could be written upon, that could be consulted, that conferred authority over reality itself. Whether divine magic or advanced technology, the texts insist it was real, was physical, was crucial to how the Anunnaki maintained control, and was therefore the most dangerous object in existence if it fell into unauthorized hands. Let that thought drift through your mind, and then release it. The Tablet of Destinies, if it ever existed, is lost now, hidden, or taken, or waiting somewhere to be found. The texts suggest it will be relevant again when the cycle completes. When the Anunnaki return, when the old structures of authority are restored. But that is not tonight's concern. Tonight, there is only rest. At the top of the Anunnaki hierarchy sits Anu. His very name means sky or heaven. But the texts about Anu reveal something strange. He does not live on earth. He dwells in his own realm, in a place the texts call the heavenly abode, or sometimes the great above. Unlike other Anunnaki who interact constantly with humans, Anu is remote, distant, arriving only for crucial moments. When he does visit, entire cities prepare. The texts describe his arrivals with ceremony and protocol that sounds almost diplomatic, as if Earth was a colony and Anu was the distant ruler checking on operations. The question that haunts scholars is simple. If these were just gods of imagination, why did the Sumerians so carefully distinguish between those who dwelt on Earth and those who only visited from elsewhere? Anu appears in texts primarily through his decisions and his occasional visits. He is described as living in the highest heaven, in a palace the texts call the Great Above, from which his name derives. His throne room is described with specific architectural details. His attendants are named, his children, Enlil, Enki, Inanna among them, regularly travel between his realm and Earth. But Anu himself remains mostly absent, governing from a distance. When Anu does visit Earth, the preparations are elaborate. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes one such visit. Anu comes to Uruk, and the entire city is put on alert. Specific protocols must be followed. Specific offerings must be prepared. The text describes this not as a spiritual visitation, but as an actual physical arrival of an important dignitary requiring appropriate reception. And Anu does not stay long. He comes for specific purposes. To address complaints, to make decisions that require his ultimate authority, and then returns to his own realm. The texts make clear distinctions in terminology when describing Anunnaki who live on Earth. Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag, The texts place them in specific cities with specific temples, but Anu is repeatedly described as dwelling in heaven, as if his residence is not metaphorically above, but literally elsewhere in a location that requires travel to reach. The Anunnaki on Earth report to him. They seek his approval for major decisions. They travel to his domain for counsels and judgments. The relationship described is less like mortals supplicating a god, and more like colonial administrators reporting to a distant capital. This creates a cosmology with 3 distinct layers. At the bottom, Earth, where humans live and work. In the middle, the Anunnaki who dwell on Earth in their designated cities, managing human affairs and planetary systems. At the top, Anu's realm, where ultimate authority resides, but rarely intervenes directly. Designated administrators to handle operations. It is a hierarchy that makes sense for governance, but seems strange for mythology, which typically does not bother with such bureaucratic layering. The question that haunts careful readers is what heaven meant to the Sumerians. Was it purely spiritual realm, another dimension? Or were they describing a physical location they could not reach but believed was real? Another world, another part of the solar system, another place from which the Anunnaki originated and to which Anu had returned, while leaving his children and subordinates to manage Earth. The texts never explain, treating Anu's remote dwelling as simple fact that requires no elaboration. Everyone knows where Anu lives. Everyone understands he is not here, but elsewhere. Everyone accepts that supreme authority over Earth resides in a king who rarely visits his colony. If you have ever felt that someone, somewhere, was watching, not in a paranoid sense, but in a sense of accountability to something larger, if you have felt that the universe has structure, has hierarchy, has levels of authority that extend beyond what we can see, then you understand something of how the Sumerians experienced their cosmos, a governed universe, with administrators at various levels and ultimate authority residing elsewhere, occasionally visiting, eventually returning. The warning preserved this understanding. The administrators departed, but the structure remains. The hierarchy exists, even if the higher levels are currently unoccupied from our perspective. When the cycle completes, when Anu descends again, when the celestial alignments mark the appointed time, the structure will be reactivated. The administrators will return to their posts, and Earth will once again be governed directly rather than left to manage on its own. Before humans were created, according to the Atrahasis epic, the lesser gods called the Igigi did all the labor. They dug canals, maintained irrigation systems, mined ore, worked the fields. But the text describes this not as divine activity, but as exhausting physical labor that the Igigi resented. For 40 years they endured, counted precisely in the text, until finally they rebelled. They threw down their tools, surrounded Enlil's house, and demanded relief. The solution the Anunnaki Council reached is disturbing. Create a new species to do the work instead. The goddess Ninhursag mixed clay from the Abzu with the blood of a sacrificed god, and humans were created specifically to serve as workers, to bear the load of the gods. The text treats this not as poetic creation myth, but as practical solution to a labor problem. The Atrahasis epic is explicit about the conditions that led to rebellion. The Igigi were assigned hard labor when the Anunnaki first arrived on Earth. The great Anunnaki supervised while the lesser Igigi did the actual work, cutting channels through rock, digging canals for 40 leagues, dredging rivers, toiling in mines. The text uses the Akkadian word dula repeatedly. Hard labor, forced labor, the kind of work that breaks bodies and spirits. For 40 years, they endured this. The Igigi met in secret, planned their action, decided to confront Enlil directly. At night, while Enlil slept, they surrounded his house. They set fire to their tools, creating a signal fire of rebellion. They declared they would work no more. Enlil woke to find his house surrounded by rebellious gods. He was frightened. He sent for Anu, and for Enki, the council convened an emergency session. Anu asked who was leading the rebellion, who should be punished. But Enlil recognized something important. The Igigi were not wrong. The labor was indeed too heavy. They had legitimate grievance. Punishing them would not solve the underlying problem. The work still needed to be done, but the Igigi could no longer be forced to do it. They needed a different solution. Benki proposed the answer. Create a new species. Take existing primitive humans. Take existing primitive humans. Hunter-gatherers already living on Earth, and modify them, enhance their intelligence and capability just enough to follow instructions and perform complex labor, but not so much that they would become ungovernable like the Igigi had become. Ninhursag would oversee the process. They would sacrifice one of the Igigi, mix his blood and flesh with clay from the Abzu. The divine component would give the new species intelligence and capability. The clay would keep them limited, mortal, manageable. The text describes the process with unsettling biological detail. Ninhursag takes the mixture and begins creating. She forms 14 beings. First, 7 male, 7 female. But the process requires refinement. Some early attempts do not work correctly. She adjusts the mixture, the proportions, the technique. Eventually, she achieves the desired result. Humans intelligent enough to understand instructions, capable enough to work tools and follow procedures, but limited in lifespan and fertility so they will not overpopulate uncontrollably. The text describes this as the bond of the gods being placed upon humans. They carry divine blood, divine capability, but diluted and constrained. The Igigi are freed from their labor. Humans take over the work. The Anunnaki are satisfied. The problem is solved. The implications are deeply disturbing. The text presents human creation not as special divine act for its own sake, not because the gods wanted companions or worshippers, but as pragmatic solution to a labor shortage. Humans were engineered as a workforce, designed to be smart enough to be useful, but limited enough to be controlled. Mesopotamians believed this. They wrote it down and preserved it for thousands of years. They taught it in their temples and schools as fundamental truth about human nature and purpose. We exist to serve. We were made for that. And our intelligence itself is a gift from the divine blood that runs diluted in our veins. If that idea disturbs you, if it conflicts with how you think about human dignity and purpose, you are having the reaction most modern people have. But consider, the ancient scribes were not trying to demean humanity. They were explaining what they believed to be true, what they had been told by those who claimed to remember, and embedded in the creation story, perhaps, is also a hope. If we carry divine blood, even diluted, then we are connected to something greater. We have potential beyond our limitations. We might, someday, reclaim more of what was diluted, more of what was constrained. The warning includes this too. When the Anunnaki return, the relationship will be renegotiated. What humanity has become in their absence will be evaluated, and perhaps the limitations placed upon us at creation might be reconsidered. Let that thought carry you deeper into rest. You carry something ancient in yourselves, something the scribes said came from beyond, something that connects you to mysteries older than memory, whatever that means, whatever truth it contains. It is part of you now. Has always been. Part of you will always be. There are whispers among researchers of texts that mainstream archaeology will not fully address. Fragments and references to tablets that describe the Anunnaki's arrival in even more detail, that give timelines and purposes that sound less like mythology and more like mission logs. Some tablets describe Enki's arrival on Earth, the establishment of settlements, the breeding of a worker species, and most intriguingly, warnings about what would happen when certain celestial cycles completed themselves. These texts exist in fragments, in references within other tablets, in scattered cuneiform inscriptions that seem to be parts of a larger narrative that was either lost, hidden, or deliberately scattered across different sites and collections, as if someone wanted the full story to be difficult to reconstruct.
The problem with studying ancient Mesopotamia is that we do not have complete libraries.
We have what survived in collapsed buildings, what was abandoned when cities fell, what was buried in foundation deposits. Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh is the largest single find, but even that represents only what one late Babylonian king chose to collect in the 7th century BCE. Earlier tablets are referenced within it, copies of copies of copies, each scribe noting they are reproducing ancient texts from before the flood or from the time of the first cities, but the originals are gone, destroyed in fires, dissolved in water, crumbled back to dust, or perhaps deliberately removed by people who decided certain knowledge should not be widely available. In the tablets that survive, there are tantalizing references to longer works that we have never found. The Epic of Gilgamesh mentions a text called The Secret of the Gods, which Gilgamesh reads on his journey, which tells him things about the past that change his understanding of mortality and divine nature. That text does not exist in any collection. The Eridu Genesis refers to earlier records about the founding of cities and the arrival of kingship, but those source documents have not been discovered. Temple inventories from Babylon list tablets by name, titles that sound like technical manuals, astronomical logs, histories of the Anunnaki, but the actual tablets are missing. Some scholars, the ones willing to discuss such things quietly, suggest there may have been deliberate culling when Christianity spread through the region. Many pagan temples were destroyed, their libraries dispersed or burned. But even before that, during periods of conquest and religious reform, certain texts might have been targeted, perhaps because they contradicted official narratives, perhaps because they contained information considered too dangerous for general knowledge. The texts that survived tend to be the ones that could be interpreted as mythology, as religious literature, as poetry, ones that read more like documentation, more like technical records, more like warnings. Those are often preserved only in fragments or oblique references. What was lost? We cannot know by definition. The lost texts are lost. We know they existed only from references in surviving texts, from gaps in our knowledge that should be filled, from questions the surviving tablets raise but do not answer. Perhaps the most important information was never written down, kept oral, passed from priest to priest, deliberately not committed to clay where it might be found by the wrong hands. Perhaps the full truth about the Anunnaki, about the cycles, about the warning, was always restricted knowledge, available only to those who had earned the right to know. If that is true, then what we have is only the public version, the stories suitable for general consumption, the information that would not cause problems if widely known. Behind that public version, there may have been deeper knowledge, more specific information, clearer warnings, and that deeper knowledge, if it existed, is gone now, lost with the priests who carried it, lost when the temples fell and the oral traditions died. Or perhaps it survives, somewhere buried tale, hidden in collections not yet catalogued, buried in sites not yet excavated, encoded in texts we have translated but not fully understood. The warning to watch the sky might be literal instruction, but it might also be metaphor, pointing to knowledge hidden in astronomical texts, in the movements of planets, in calculations that seem merely mathematical but contain something more. Let that uncertainty rest lightly. We work with what we have. We make meaning from the fragments. We acknowledge what is lost, while treasuring what remains. This is all any generation can do. Pass along what they received, note what they could not find, hope that future searchers will discover what eluded them. The relationship between Enlil and Enki creates constant tension in the texts. Enlil is the elder son of Anu. given supreme authority over Earth, Enki is the younger son, clever and rebellious, given dominion over the waters and the Abzu, but subordinate to Enlil's overall command. They disagree constantly. Enlil wants humanity controlled or destroyed. Enki wants humanity protected and developed. Enlil enforces rules, Enki finds loopholes. The dynamic reads less like mythological narrative and more like sibling rivalry in a royal family. Two brothers with different philosophies, given overlapping authority by a distant father who will not intervene to settle their disputes. This tension appears in text after text. When the Anunnaki Council votes to send the flood, Enlil enforces the decision. Enki subverts it by warning Utnapishtim. When humans become troublesome, Enlil proposes harsh measures. Enki proposes education and modification. When the EGG rebel, Enlil wants punishment. Enki proposes creating humans to solve the underlying problem. Again and again, the same pattern, Enlil representing order and control. Enki representing creativity and compassion. The texts do not clearly take sides. Both approaches have merits. Both brothers are respected. Both remain part of the governing structure throughout Mesopotamian history, but readers often find themselves drawn to Enki, the one who saved humanity, the one who gave knowledge, the one who found ways to help even when helping was forbidden. This preference may reflect something about human nature. We like underdogs. We admire those who bend rules for good purposes. We identify with those who are clever rather than powerful, or perhaps the preference reflects something the texts themselves encode. Perhaps Enki was the Anunnaki who cared most about humanity, whose interests most aligned with ours. Whose perspective should be remembered? The warning to watch the sky might be connected to this. Enki's faction, the Anunnaki who protected humanity, might be the ones whose return would be welcome. While Enlil's faction, the Anunnaki who saw humanity as tools or problems, might be the ones whose return should be feared. The texts are not clear about this. They preserve the tension without resolving it, present both perspectives without declaring which is correct. Perhaps the original scribes did not know. Perhaps the question of which Anunnaki would return, and with what intentions, was genuinely uncertain. Watch the sky might mean be prepared for either. Be ready for salvation or judgment, depending on who arrives first. If you have felt torn between order and freedom, between rules and creativity, between control and compassion, you have felt the tension that runs through these ancient texts, the same arguments that the Anunnaki supposedly had among themselves echo in every human society and every individual heart. Perhaps this is inherited from them. Perhaps the divine blood that diluted in our veins carried this conflict with it. Perhaps we cannot resolve it because we carry both sides within us. Let that tension rest for now. You do not need to choose tonight, do not need to resolve what millennia have not resolved, the question of order versus freedom, control versus compassion. We'll be there tomorrow. For now, let both sides rest. Let Enlil and Enki both sleep. Let the ancient argument pause. The nights in ancient Mesopotamia were dark, no electric lights, no screens glowing, no ambient illumination from distant cities, just the stars, more stars than we can imagine, filling the sky from horizon to horizon. The priests who watched from ziggurats saw a sky we have forgotten, a sky so full of light that the Milky Way cast shadows, a sky where every constellation stood clear and distinct, a sky that seemed to speak. They watched this sky night after night, tracking movements too subtle for casual observation, noting changes that accumulated over years and decades, maintaining records that would take centuries to complete. What would it be like to watch that sky? To lie on your back in the darkness, surrounded by silence, while thousands of stars wheeled slowly overhead, to feel small, but also connected, part of something vast and ancient and purposeful. The priests believed the sky held messages, that the gods communicated through celestial movements, that paying attention was sacred duty. We have lost that sense. We look at the sky now and see objects, bodies governed by physical laws, interesting but not meaningful. But sometimes, on a dark night far from city lights, when the stars reveal themselves in their ancient multitude, something stirs. A memory of how the sky once felt, of what it might mean to watch and wait and receive. Let yourself feel that now if you can. Not the literal sky above you, but the idea of the sky, the sense of something vast and significant overhead, watching as you watch, waiting as you wait. The ancient priests would understand this feeling. They lived in it, breathed it, built their lives around it. You can touch it briefly in the darkness before sleep. A connection across millennia. A sharing of the watching that has never quite ended. The watching continues. Somewhere tonight, someone is looking at the sky, wondering what the ancients knew, thinking about cycles and returns and warnings. Somewhere tonight, an archaeologist is cataloging tablets, adding to our knowledge of what the scribes preserved. Somewhere tonight, a child is learning about Sumer for the first time, beginning their journey into the ancient mystery. The chain extends in all directions, backward to the first observers, forward to those who will come after, sideways to everyone alive who has ever wondered about these things. You are part of that chain, one node in a vast network of wondering, connected to all who have asked these questions and all who will ask them. That connection can hold you as you sleep. You are not alone in your wondering, not isolated in your questions. The same thoughts that passed through your mind tonight have passed through millions of minds before, and will pass through millions more. There is comfort in that, if you let yourself feel it. The comfort of shared mystery, of questions too big for any individual to answer, but small enough for everyone to hold. Sleep now in that comfort. The questions will keep, the mystery will remain, the warning will wait. Rest The council meetings described in the texts have a peculiar quality. They read less like divine assemblies and more like board meetings, executives gathered to discuss problems, debate solutions, vote on policies. Baba, the Anunnaki Council, when it convened to address the human problem, followed procedures, speakers were recognized, arguments were made, decisions required majority support. This is strange for mythology. Gods in most traditions act by fiat, by divine will that needs no justification. They do not debate, do not vote, do not compromise. But the Anunnaki deliberate. They have different opinions. They must persuade each other. They can be outvoted. The flood decision was not unanimous. The texts describe Enki arguing against it, warning that destroying humanity would create other problems, that the labor situation would return to what it had been before humans were created. Boy, he was overruled. The majority voted for destruction. But he was not punished for dissenting. His opinion was recorded. His subsequent subversion, warning, Utnapishtim, was later accepted as valid. Once the other Anunnaki realized they had made a mistake. This is remarkably democratic governance for beings described as gods.
The decisions recorded in the texts follow logical processes. Problem identified.
The Gigi are rebelling. Options considered: punish them, reduce their workload, create replacement workers, solution chosen, create humans. Problem identified: humanity is multiplying too rapidly. Options considered: plague, famine, flood. Solutions attempted, each one countered by Enki. Final solution chosen: modified humanity with limited lifespans and fertility. The pattern is consistent. Identify problem, generate options, evaluate consequences, implement solution, adjust as needed. This is how organizations make decisions, how administrations govern, how complex systems are managed. If the Anunnaki were imaginary, why would the Sumerians imagine them this way? Why not all-powerful gods who simply decree? Why not mysterious forces that act without explanation? Why this peculiar bureaucracy, this committee structure, this procedural governance? Perhaps because that is how they observed the Anunnaki actually operating. Perhaps the scribes recorded what they witnessed, or what they were told by those who had witnessed. Administrative meetings among powerful beings. The texts even record disagreements that were never resolved. But Enlil's frustration with Enki's interventions appears repeatedly. The tension between strict enforcement and creative subversion remains throughout the entire corpus of Mesopotamian literature. This is realistic. Real organizations have factions. Real administrations have ongoing disputes. Real governance involves compromise and accommodation rather than perfect consensus. If the scribes were inventing, they invented with remarkable psychological realism. They created gods who behaved like administrators, complete with interdepartmental conflicts and policy disagreements. What does it mean for gods to disagree? In most theological frameworks, divine disagreement is either impossible, because there is only one God, or resolved immediately by hierarchy, the supreme deity settles all disputes. But the Anunnaki disagree across thousands of years of texts. Their disputes are never finally resolved. The tension between Enlil's approach and Enki's approach persists. This suggests either remarkably sophisticated theological thinking by the Sumerians or faithful recording of actual ongoing conflicts among beings who really did disagree. Let that organizational complexity rest in your mind, not as something to analyze, but as texture, as background. The Anunnaki, if they existed, were not simple, not unified, not single-minded in their approach to humanity. There were advocates and critics, protectors and destroyers, those who saw potential in humanity and those who saw only problems. Perhaps the outcome of the return, if return happens, will depend on which faction prevails, which perspective dominates in whatever council convenes to evaluate what humanity has become. The genetic legacy. If the creation texts are taken literally, humans carry something from the Anunnaki in our very cells. Blood of the sacrificed god mixed with clay, giving us intelligence and capability beyond what mere animals possess. This is an origin story that places divinity within us, not outside us. We are not just creatures shaped by distant gods. We contain divine substance, however diluted. Modern genetics has revealed how much we share with other species, how close we are genetically to chimpanzees, to other mammals, to all life on Earth. But it has also revealed how quickly evolution can work, how small genetic changes can produce large effects, how complex capabilities can emerge from relatively simple modifications. If something intervened in human evolution, enhancing intelligence, modifying capability, the changes might be subtle at the genetic level, difficult to distinguish from natural variation. We would not necessarily see clear evidence of intervention. We would see what we do see, a species that emerged remarkably quickly, with capabilities that seemed disproportionate to our physical advantages. The Sumerians believed the intervention was real, believed they knew its story, believed it explained why humans are different from other animals. We explain the same facts differently now, through evolution, natural selection, environmental pressures. Both explanations account for the evidence. Both create coherent narratives. Both could be true or false, bad or partially true in ways we do not yet understand. If you carry something ancient in your cells, something placed there by design rather than accident, does it matter? Does it change how you live? Boo. How you think about yourself, how you treat others? Perhaps not. We are who we are, regardless of how we came to be. Our choices remain our choices. Our lives remain our lives. But something shifts. Perhaps when you consider the possibility. A sense of connection to something larger, a question about purpose, a wondering, about whether the capabilities we take for granted were given rather than earned. Let that wondering rest now. It does not require resolution. It is simply another thread in the mystery, another aspect of the warning the scribes preserved. You carry something, whether divine blood or evolutionary inheritance or both, something that makes you human, something that connects you to all who came before and all who will come after. That is enough to know for tonight. The hours grow late. If you are still listening, still drifting between waking and sleep, you have traveled far tonight. Through 5,000 years of preserved warning, through questions that have no easy answers, through mysteries that remain mysterious despite all our analysis, the ancient scribes would recognize what you are doing. They too lay in darkness, thinking about the gods, wondering about cycles and returns, waiting for something they could not quite name. The practice of wondering is ancient. The experience of mystery is eternal. You are doing what humans have always done, what humans may always do. Let that continuity comfort you. You are not alone in your uncertainty, not isolated in your questions. The same wondering that keeps you awake tonight kept scribes awake 5,000 years ago will keep someone awake 5,000 years from now. The warning persists because the wondering persists, because something in humans needs to ask these questions, needs to remember that the world is stranger than it seems. Sleep now, carrying the wondering with you. It will be there when you wake, softer perhaps, less urgent, but present, a background awareness that life contains mysteries, that history hides secrets, that the future may hold surprises we cannot imagine. The scribes are sleeping now, have been sleeping for millennia. Their tablets remain awake, waiting to speak to anyone who will listen. You have listened. Now you too can rest. The temples were not just places of worship. They were observation posts, watching stations, maintained across millennia to monitor something the priests believed was coming. Every major Mesopotamian city had a temple complex, and at the center of most complexes stood a ziggurat, a stepped pyramid that rose above the flat plain, visible for miles. Modern tourists see these structures as monuments to religion, expressions of devotion, impressive architecture. But the Sumerians called them something else. Houses that are the link between heaven and earth. The ziggurats were not tombs. Like Egyptian pyramids, they were platforms with shrines at their summits, small rooms where priests maintained constant vigil. What were they watching for? The texts say they were waiting for the gods to descend, maintaining a place where the boundary between realms could be crossed, keeping the link open. Some scholars have suggested the ziggurats were symbolic, representing the cosmic mountain where heaven and earth meet in mythology. But the Sumerians invested enormous resources in building and maintaining them, resources that could have been used for other purposes. They rebuilt them when they crumbled, enlarged them when cities grew, maintained them through conquest and upheaval. That level of investment suggests more than symbolism. It suggests purpose. The ziggurat at Ur, one of the best preserved, rises over 60 feet above the surrounding plain. Built around 2100 BCE by King Ur-Nammu, it has survived 4,000 years of weather, war, and neglect. Even in ruin, it dominates the landscape, a massive step structure that commands attention. The shrine at the summit is gone now, but the texts describe what was there: a small room, furnished for a god, with a bed, a table, food and drink offerings, maintained as if the deity might arrive at any moment. The priest who served there climbed the long stairs, daily renewed the offerings, swept the floor, changed the linens. Everything kept ready. For what? For when the god descended. For when Nana, Ephraim, the moon god to whom the ziggurat was dedicated, chose to visit his earthly house, the vigil never ended. Not in 4,000 years of continuous temple service. Generation after generation of priests climbed those stairs, maintained those offerings, watched the sky from that high platform, waiting. Most days, nothing happened. Most years, nothing happened. Most lifetimes, nothing happened. But they kept watching, because the text said the gods had descended before and would descend again. And when that day came, the house needed to be ready. Perhaps you have waited for something. Something you were told would come. Something you prepared for, even when the waiting grew long. If so, you understand something about those priests? About what it means to maintain faith through absence? To keep vigil even when the evidence suggests the waiting is pointless? The Sumerians called this duty, not faith. It was not about believing the gods would come. It was about being ready when they did. The temples kept records. Administrative documents, yes, backing offerings and expenses and personnel, but also astronomical observations, carefully recorded night after night, year after year. Century after century, the priests were watching the sky, not just as religious duty, but as scientific observation. They tracked the moon's phases, the planets' movements, the rising and setting of stars. They noted eclipses, recording the date, the duration, the portion of sun or moon obscured. They watched for comets, for unusual phenomena, for anything that might be significant. And they connected what they saw to what the ancient texts predicted. The sky was not just scenery to them. It was a message system, a way the gods communicated their intentions, a calendar marking when certain events would occur. The astronomical knowledge accumulated over millennia. Babylon, Assyria, Persia, Syria, Persia, inherited this knowledge and continued the observations. The chain of watching stretched across 3,000 years, one of the longest continuous scientific projects in human history, and throughout Tree. The purpose remained the same: watching for signs, tracking cycles, preparing for events the ancient tablets had predicted. When we look at the sky today, we see the same stars they saw. The constellations have shifted slightly due to precession, but the patterns are recognizable. Orion still rises in winter. The Pleiades still cluster together. The Milky Way still arches overhead on dark nights. We have lost much of what the ancient observers knew. We no longer read the sky as they did, no longer see messages in planetary movements, no longer feel the weight of celestial cycles on our lives, but the sky is unchanged, and whatever the ancients watched for is still there. Oh, still coming. Let your eyes close now, if they have not already. Imagine the ancient priests on their ziggurats, watching the same stars you could see if you went outside tonight, recording the same planetary movements our telescopes track, waiting for signs we no longer know how to read. They are gone, but the sky remains, the cycles continue. The watching could resume if we remembered how. If we knew what to look for. The question of timing. Throughout the tablets, there are references to specific periods, specific cycles, specific alignments that mark significant transitions. The Sar, a period of 3,600 years, appears repeatedly. The antediluvian kings' reigns are multiples of Sar. The cycles of celestial events are measured in Sar. The time between major events is counted in Sar. Why 3,600? In the Sumerian mathematical system, which was base boom. 60 rather than our base. 10. 3,600 is a significant number. It is 60 squared, a perfect mathematical unit, but was the number chosen for mathematical convenience? Or does it represent something real? Some actual period in celestial mechanics? Some cycle the ancients observed and measured? Some researchers have noted that 3,600 years is close to certain astronomical cycles. The orbital period of some long-period comets, the interval between certain planetary alignments, the precession of certain celestial reference points. Whether any of these connections are meaningful or just coincidence remains debated. But the Sumerians clearly believed 3,600 years was significant. They built their chronology around it. They expected important events to occur at Sar intervals, if we count backward from known dates using Sar intervals. Interesting things emerge. The flood, dated by some calculations to around 10,000 BCE, would be roughly 3 Sar before the height of Sumerian civilization. The departure of the active Anunnaki presence roughly 1 Sar before that. If the pattern continued, if another Sar has elapsed or is elapsing now, then we might be approaching a significant point in the cycle. This is speculation, of course. The dates are uncertain. The calculations are contested. The assumptions may be wrong. But the structure of the warning was about cycles, about things that recur at predictable intervals, about watching for signs that a transition is approaching. If the scribes were right, then the question is not whether another significant point will come, but when. What would you do if you knew the timing? If you knew that within your lifetime or your children's lifetimes something significant would occur? Would you prepare? How would you prepare? What would preparation even mean? The ancient priests had answers to these questions. They maintained temples. They kept offerings ready. They watched the sky. They preserved the warning. We have lost their certainty about what to do. Even if we accepted their premise, we would not know how to respond. Perhaps that is part of what was lost when the Anunnaki withdrew. Not just their presence, but the instructions for what to do in their absence. The protocols for preparation, the knowledge of how to be ready. The warning survived, but the instruction manual did not. Or, if it did, we have not found it, or not recognized it for what it is. Let that uncertainty rest lightly. You do not need to solve this tonight. You do not need to prepare for anything specific. The warning has waited 5,000 years. It can wait until morning. For now, only rest. Only the slow drift towards sleep. Only the ancient questions settling into the background where they have always waited, patient as stone. The resonance with modern times. Many who encounter the Sumerian texts feel something familiar in them, something that echoes in contemporary experience. In contemporary questions, we too live in a time of rapid change, when the old certainties are dissolving, when the structures that seemed permanent are revealed as temporary. We too wonder about our origins, about whether we are alone, about what might be out there watching, waiting, preparing to make contact. We too feel that something is coming, though we cannot say what. A transition, a transformation. A shift in the fundamental conditions of existence. Perhaps this resonance is coincidence. Humans in every age feel that their time is special, that great changes are imminent, that they live at a pivot point of history. Or perhaps the resonance is real. Perhaps we are approaching something significant. And some part of us recognizes it, feels the approaching edge of the cycle. The ancient scribes would say we should watch the sky, should pay attention to the signs, should prepare for what is coming. Modern people mostly ignore this advice. We have other concerns, other distractions, other frameworks for understanding our time, but the texts remain. The warning persists, and for those who encounter it, something often stirs, a recognition that this might matter, that the ancient observers might have known something we have forgotten. If you have felt that stirring, that sense of recognition, you are not alone. Many people across cultures and centuries have felt it. Have wondered if the ancient texts contain genuine warning. Have looked at the sky and wondered what the ancestors were watching for. This is a thread that runs through human experience.
A question that never quite goes away, no matter how much we explain it as mythology.
As primitive superstition, as pre-scientific confusion, something in the text resonates. Something in the warning feels relevant. Perhaps it is simply human nature to want meaning, to want to feel connected to something larger, to want to believe that the universe has structure and purpose. Or perhaps the resonance points to something real, preserved across millennia because it needed to be preserved, waiting for a time when it would matter again. You do not need to decide which interpretation is correct. Both can coexist in your mind. The skeptical explanation and the mysterious one. The possibility that the scribes were simply recording their beliefs, and the possibility that they were recording something true. Uncertainty is not failure. It is honest response to evidence that does not clearly point one way. The scribes themselves probably had moments of doubt, moments when they wondered if the gods they served were real. But
If the cycles they tracked would actually bring the promised return.
But they kept copying the tablets, kept maintaining the temples, kept watching the sky. Perhaps that is all any of us can do. Maintain the practice even when certainty fails. Continue the observation even when meaning is unclear. Let the questions rest now. They have accompanied humanity for thousands of years. They will be there tomorrow, and the next day, and for as long as humans look up at the sky and wonder. For tonight, let them settle into silence. Let the ancient voices fade to whispers. Let sleep come as it comes to all who wait, eventually, gently, completely. The foundation deposits deserve special attention. When the Sumerians built important structures, they placed objects beneath the foundations, small collections of items buried where they would not be disturbed, intended to last as long as the building itself. These deposits contained inscriptions. Often they named the king who built the structure, the god to whom it was dedicated, the date of construction. But they also contained messages addressed to whoever might find them in the distant future. The practice is remarkably similar to modern time capsules. We bury collections of objects and documents, hoping someone in the future will find them, will understand our time through what we left behind. The Sumerians did the same. 5,000 years ago, but their time capsules were not addressed to their descendants in general. They were addressed to the gods or to the future kings who would rebuild when the structure eventually crumbled. And sometimes they were addressed to us, to whoever found them, whoever could read the ancient script, whoever inherited the world the Sumerians had helped to build. One foundation deposit from Lagash, dating to around 2100 BCE, contains a cylinder with an inscription that seems to speak across time. The text asks future readers to honor what was built, to maintain what was established, to remember the gods who were served. But it also says something strange. It says the deposit was placed so that when the building was rebuilt in a future age, the new builders would know what had come before, as if the original builders knew their work would crumble. That time would destroy what they made, but that the message would survive, waiting for those who came after. This awareness of time, this consciousness of deep future, runs through Sumerian culture. They knew they were temporary. They knew their cities would fall, their tablets would crumble, their names would be forgotten, but they also believed something would survive, some trace of what they knew, some fragment of the warning they preserved, and they were right. We found the deposits. We translated the tablets. We carry the message they left. Perhaps you have thought about leaving something for the future, a letter for children not yet born, a record of what your life was like, a message for whoever comes after. If so, you understand the impulse that drove the Sumerian scribes, the desire to reach beyond death, to speak to those who will live when you are gone. The tablets were their voice, extended across millennia, still speaking to anyone who will listen. The warning was part of what they wanted preserved, not just the names of kings, not just the glories of civilization, but the knowledge that something had come before, that something would come again. They placed this warning in foundations, where it would be protected, where it would outlast the buildings above, where future excavators would eventually find it. Time capsules within time capsules, messages nested inside messages, all carrying the same essential content. They came before, they will come again. Watch the sky. The persistence of the warning is remarkable. Across 3,000 years of Mesopotamian civilization, through dozens of dynasties, through invasions and conquests and religious reforms, the warning remained. It survived the fall of Sumer to Akkad, the fall of Akkad to Babylon, the fall of Babylon to Assyria, the fall of Assyria to Persia. Each conquering culture absorbed the warning, translated it into their language, copied it onto their tablets, maintained it in their temples. Why? Why would conquerors preserve the religious texts of the conquered? Why maintain traditions that had no relevance to the new rulers? Unless the warning was considered genuinely important, unless each successive culture recognized something in it worth preserving, unless the message transcended the particular civilization that first recorded it. The Babylonians who conquered Sumer did not dismiss Sumerian religion as primitive. They adopted it. They identified their own gods with the Sumerian pantheon. Marduk became paramount, but he was incorporated into the existing structure, not substituted for it. The astronomical observations continued. The temple rituals continued. The warning continued, as if something about it compelled continuation, as if each generation that encountered it felt the same need to pass it along. We are another link in that chain. We found the tablets. We translated them. We have made the warning accessible to anyone who wants to read it. Whether we believe it or not, we have preserved it, passed it along, added our contribution to the chain that stretches back to the first scribes who pressed reed into wet clay. What will future generations make of our preservation? Will they study the Sumerian texts as curiosities, artifacts of primitive superstition? Or will they find in them something relevant to their own time, something the ancient scribes were right to preserve? We cannot know. We can only do what the scribes did: maintain the message, pass it along. Trust that someone in the future will find value in what we preserved. This. Diseases go on. Uruk? Eridu, Nippur, Lagash, Babylon, Nineveh, names that once meant power, civilization, the center of the world. Now they are ruins, archaeological sites, mounds of dirt in an Iraqi desert. The ziggurats have crumbled, the temples have collapsed, the canals have silted, the rivers have changed course. Everything the Sumerians built has returned to the earth from which it came, but the tablets remain. Clay is remarkably durable. Fire that destroys wood and paper bakes clay harder. Water that dissolves ink leaves clay intact. Time that crumbles stone leaves clay preserved. The tablets have survived everything that destroyed the civilization that created them. They have survived wars that burned libraries, floods that buried cities, neglect that allowed monuments to crumble. And now they sit in museums around the world, in London and Paris and Berlin and Baghdad, waiting to be read, waiting to deliver the message they have carried for 5,000 years. There is something almost miraculous about this survival. Not miraculous in the supernatural sense, but miraculous in the sense of improbable. Of all the things that could have survived, the fragile clay tablets did. The great monuments are gone. The treasures were looted. The wisdom that was never written was lost. But the tablets, the humble clay rectangles covered with wedge-shaped impressions, these survived. Be as if something wanted the message preserved, as if the warning was too important to lose, as if the chain of transmission was protected by something beyond human intention. Or perhaps it is just chance, the random survival of certain artifacts and not others. Clay happens to be durable. The tablets happen to be buried in conditions that preserve them. Archaeologists happened to find them before they were destroyed. Chance is a sufficient explanation. No intervention required. But the effect is the same. The warning reached us. 5,000 years after it was written, the message was delivered, and now you carry it too. Let that thought settle into you as sleep approaches. You are part of the chain now. One more mind that has held the warning. One more link between the ancient scribes and whatever comes next. Whether the warning is true or false, whether the Anunnaki were real or imagined, whether the return will happen or will not, you have received the message. You have heard what the scribes wanted, heard. That is enough for tonight. That is more than most people ever know. The scribes would be satisfied if they could know that their tablets survived, their warning was translated, that someone 5,000 years in their future lay in the darkness, listening to what they wrote, wondering about what they knew. This is what they hoped for. This is why they pressed stylus into clay. This is the purpose behind the copying and the preserving and the burying and foundations, so that someone like you someday would hear. You have heard. Now rest. The warning will wait. The questions will keep. The ancient mystery will still be there when you wake. But for now, only darkness, only quiet, only the slow drift into the same sleep that claimed the scribes when their work was done, when the tablets were complete, when the message was safely recorded. They rested then. You can rest now. The chain continues, but it does not require your waking attention. It continues in memory, in the tablets, sitting in museums, in the words that have been spoken and recorded and passed along. You have done your part by listening, by receiving, by letting the warning settle into your mind. Tomorrow, you may think about it beyond, or you may not. Either way, the message has been delivered. Sleep now. If the tablets recorded official narratives, the cylinder seals showed something else. Carved with intricate scenes, then rolled across wet clay to create images, contained some of the most puzzling evidence about the Anunnaki. Cylinder seals were the signature technology of ancient Mesopotamia. A small stone cylinder, rarely more than a few inches long, carved with a scene in negative relief. When rolled across wet clay, it produced a positive image that served as identification, authorization, proof of ownership. They were used on contracts, property boundaries, letters, storage jars. The seal was your identity, your signature, legally binding. But the images carved into these seals tell stories. The tablets sometimes do not. Perhaps because they were personal possessions rather than official archives. Perhaps because visual imagery could preserve information differently than written text. Perhaps because the seal carvers had access to traditions or knowledge that were not part of formal literature. Whatever the reason, when you examine thousands of cylinder seals from museums worldwide, patterns emerge that complicate the official narrative. The Anunnaki appear with specific symbols, consistent across thousands of seals. Over thousands of years, Enki appears with flowing water streams. Often with the goatfish symbol, Inanna appears with the 8-pointed star of Venus. Shamash, the sun god, has rayed circles. Nana, the moon god, has crescent symbols. These are not variable artistic choices. They are standardized iconography, maintained across centuries in different cities, suggesting official symbols everyone understood and was required to reproduce correctly. Some seals show figures wearing what appear to be elaborate headdresses or helmets with what look like tubes extending downward. Mainstream archaeology interprets these as stylized divine crowns with ribbons. But the depictions are oddly consistent and oddly functional in appearance. Circular or cylindrical head coverings with tubes extending to the chest area. In some seals, the detail is remarkable. Straps, rivets, sealed units. These could be mythological symbols, they could be ritual implements, or they could be attempts to depict technology using the visual vocabulary available to ancient artists who were trying to record what they saw. The standard academic approach is to interpret everything through mythology. Any unusual object must be a symbol of divine power. Any strange scene must represent a myth we know from texts, buzz, or an unknown mythological narrative. And most of the time, that interpretation probably works. But occasionally you encounter seals where the mythological interpretation requires such elaborate explanation that you wonder if the simpler answer They were trying to depict actual objects and actual events, might deserve consideration. The Sumerians were not primitive. They were sophisticated observers who recorded what they saw with remarkable precision in their texts. Why assume their visual art was less precise, less observational, less documentary than their writing? What the cylinder seals preserve, then, might be a parallel record to the tablets' official literature in text form. Personal documentation in image form, both maintained with remarkable consistency over thousands of years, both showing the Anunnaki as specific individuals with specific symbols and specific attributes that never varied, both treating these beings as documented reality rather than imaginative creation. Here is what makes scholars truly uncomfortable. The Sumerians knew too much, too early. They had sophisticated understanding of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes 25,800 years to complete. They tracked planetary movements with precision that should not have been possible without advanced instruments. They divided the sky into 12 sections that became the zodiac. They knew there were planets beyond what the naked eye could see. The moon, ape tablets dating to around 1200 BCE but copying much older material, contain astronomical observations and calculations that suggest either centuries of careful observation or knowledge transferred from somewhere else. They list constellations, planets, stars, and their movements. They describe heliacal risings, when specific stars first become visible before dawn. They track solstices and equinoxes. They provide data for calculating the length of daylight throughout the year. This is sophisticated astronomical knowledge requiring careful observation over long periods and mathematical ability to predict celestial patterns. But here is where it gets strange. The Sumerians knew about precession around 3000 BCE. This is the phenomenon where Earth's rotational axis slowly wobbles like a spinning top, causing the position of stars to shift very gradually over time. The entire cycle takes 25,800 years, far longer than any civilization could track through direct observation. Modern astronomers did not rediscover precession until Hipparchus documented it in the 2nd century BCE. Yet the Sumerians incorporated precession into their astronomical calculations, and more significantly, into their mythology. They described vast cycles of time called SARs, periods of 3,600 years that marked ages and returns. Throughout these astronomical texts, the movements of planets are associated with specific Anunnaki deities. Jupiter is Marduk, Venus is Inanna, Big Saturn is Ninurta, the moon is Nana, the sun is Utu, but these are not just poetic associations. The text suggests that watching these celestial bodies was watching for the presence or return of the associated Anunnaki, as if planetary movements were somehow connected to where these beings were and when they might return to Earth. The astronomical observations were not purely scientific. They were part of a system of monitoring, of waiting, of preparing for anticipated events. If you have ever looked at the night sky and felt something, a sense of connection, or waiting, or significance, you are feeling what the ancient astronomers felt. They watched the sky not just for seasons, but for signs. Not just for prediction, but for preparation. They believed something was written in the movements of stars and planets, something about cycles and returns. Something about when the boundary between heaven and earth would become permeable again. In the astronomical texts, there is mention of a celestial body called Nibiru. The word means crossing point, or planet of the crossing.
The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, describes Nibiru as the star of the god Marduk,
associated with Jupiter, but also described as something that crosses through the solar system. In the 1970s, a researcher named Zecharia Sitchin proposed that Nibiru was a hidden planet on an elliptical orbit of 3,600 years, and that the Anunnaki came from this planet. Mainstream scholars dismiss this entirely. There is no evidence for such a planet, and Sitchin's translations were often inaccurate. But here is what makes the question linger. The ancient texts do describe celestial cycles connected to the Anunnaki's presence or absence. They do treat certain astronomical events as times when the boundary between heaven and earth becomes crossable, whether Nibiru was planet, comet, or metaphor. The Sumerians clearly believed that something in the sky marked the times of arrival and return. The word Nibiru appears in multiple contexts. Sometimes it refers to a crossing point in the sky, the celestial equator, where the ecliptic crosses. Sometimes it is associated with Marduk specifically, as his star or planet, and sometimes it is described as something that appears periodically, that crosses through the solar system, that marks significant epochs. In the Enuma Elish, Marduk defeats Tiamat, the primordial chaos monster, and from her body creates the heavens and earth as reward. B. The other gods give Marduk supremacy and establish Nibiru as his star, his marker in the heavens. The text describes Nibiru's function. He shall be the keeper of the crossing points. It marks boundaries, transitions, significant moments when conditions change. Whether Nibiru was planet, comet, or astronomical metaphor for a recurring cycle, the Sumerians clearly believed that something celestial marked the rhythm of Anunnaki presence and absence. That there were appointed times, that the sky held signs for those who knew how to read them, that watching planetary movements was not just about agriculture or astrology, but about knowing when the boundary between heaven and earth became crossable again, when the administrators might return to check on the colony, when the cycle that had begun with their arrival might complete itself and begin again. The warning was always about timing. The scribes did not say the Anunnaki might return. They said they would return when certain conditions were met, when certain cycles completed, when certain celestial alignments occurred. The question was not if, but when. And the astronomical knowledge they preserved, the precision of their celestial observations, the careful tracking of cycles longer than any human lifetime. All of this was in service of the warning, preparation for something they believed was inevitable. even if it lay far in the future. Are we living in the time the tablets warned about? Some who study these texts believe we are approaching a significant point in the cycles, a transition age, when the old configuration gives way to something new. The precession of the equinoxes is moving us from one astrological age to another. The celestial markers the ancients watched are shifting. The alignments they tracked are changing. Others dismiss this as speculation, pattern matching without evidence, reading significance into coincidence, and perhaps they are right. But the warning remains unchanged across 5,000 years, passed from scribe to scribe, buried in foundations, preserved in libraries that survived when empires fell. They came before. They will come again. Watch the sky. What would it mean if the warning were true? What would it mean if the Anunnaki, or something like them, had been here, had established cities, had created or modified humanity, and had promised or threatened to return? Perhaps it would change very little. We would still wake tomorrow, still go about our lives, still love and work and dream. The knowledge that we might not be alone in the universe, that our origins might be more complex than we thought, that cycles larger than history might govern our fate. This knowledge would not change what we do, only how we understand what we do. Or perhaps it would change everything. Perhaps knowing that someone is watching, that someone will return, that our actions are being observed and will be evaluated, perhaps this would change how we treat each other, how we treat the planet, how we think about the future. The scribes believed it mattered. They preserved the warning because they thought someone would need it, would benefit from knowing. You have heard the warning now. You are one more link in the chain of those who know what the ancient scribes tried to preserve. You carry something they wanted carried forward. What you do with it is yours to decide. Let your breathing deepen now. Let your body sink into whatever surface holds you. The ancient questions can rest. The warnings can settle into the background of your mind. They have waited 5,000 years. They can wait until morning. Sleep now, as the scribes slept. After long days of pressing stylus into clay, of copying tablets their predecessors had copied, of preserving knowledge they hoped would matter to someone someday, they are gone now. The tablets remain, the questions remain, and you remain. Carrying the thread forward, the stars turn overhead, as they have always turned. The cycles continue, whether we watch them or not. But perhaps tonight, in some small way, you are watching. You are part of the long chain of observers who have looked up and wondered, what is out there? What was here before? What will come again? The Sumerians asked these questions and did their best to answer them with what they knew. Now, the questions are yours, to hold, to consider, to pass along if you choose. Sleep now. The sky keeps its secrets for now.
The tablets have said what they can say. The warning has been delivered. Rest. Rest.
But before you drift away completely, one final thought. The warning about return, the cycles and celestial signs, the waiting that has continued for millennia. But there are other threads, other questions the tablets raise, other aspects of the Anunnaki story that deserve their own journey. If you found yourself wondering about human origins, about what the creation texts actually say happened when humanity was made, about the mixing of divine blood and earthly clay, that story waits for you in a video called What If the Sumerians Recorded the True Origin of Humanity? The tablets describe the process in remarkable detail. The reasons, the methods, the early experiments that failed before success. The scribes believed they knew exactly how humanity came to be, and they wrote it down with the same precision they applied to everything else. And if you found yourself curious about what came after, about what the world was like when the Anunnaki were present, about how they organized their cities and divided their territories, about what humanity inherited when they finally departed. That story also waits in a video called What If Humans Inherited a World Once Ruled by the Anunnaki? The tablets describe a world we can barely imagine, direct governance from beings who claim to have created us, cities assigned to specific deities, systems and structures that humanity later tried to maintain on its own, with varying degrees of success. Both stories connect to what you have heard tonight. Both deepen the mystery. Both offer more of what the ancient scribes preserved, but that is for another night, when you are ready, when the questions call you back. For now, let sleep take you. Let the ancient world fade into the quiet darkness. The tablets will be there tomorrow. The questions will remain. The warning will continue its long journey through time. You are part of that journey now. One more mind that has held these ideas, one more dreamer who has wondered about the sky. Rest now in the company of all who have wondered before you, and all who will wonder after. The Sumerians are sleeping now, have been sleeping for 5,000 years. Their cities are dust. Their tablets survive, and through those tablets they speak still to anyone who will listen, to anyone who will carry the message forward. You have listened. Now, sleep until we meet again in the ancient darkness where all questions wait and all answers hide. Good night, babe.